Değerli panelistlerimiz, saygıdeğer katılımcılarımız, hoş geldiniz. idRc2020 birinci gün saat 14'te başlayacak sürdürülebilir dayanıklılık temalı 2 nolu oturumumuza hoş geldiniz. Bu oturumda sizlere teknik destek sunmaya çalışacağım. Chat özelliğimiz katılımcılar için kapalı kalacak. Sorularınız için ortada altta bulunan Q&A kısmından yararlanabilirsiniz. Oturumu başlatması için sözü oturum moderatörü Nuri Özbağdatlı'ya bırakıyorum.
Çok teşekkürler. Herkese merhabalar. Bugün 2 saatimiz olacak. 2 saat içerisinde birbirinden kıymetli, değerli konuşmacılarla hem sürdürülebilirlik hem dayanıklılık arasındaki ilişkileri şehir ölçeğinde, şehrin hinterlandı olan ve bir gıda sistemi, enerji sistemi, atık sistemi olarak bir sistem olarak ele alacağımız bir toplantımız olacak. Bugünkü katılımcılar arasında bazıları Türkiye'den katılıyor. Ben Ankara'dayım. Melike Hanım Ankara'da, Betül Hanım İstanbul'da. Bazı konuşmacılarımız da Brüksel'den katılan, Barcelona'dan katılan ve Selanik'ten katılan katılımcılarımız, konuşmacılarımız var. Ben bir konuşmacımızı bu arada bekliyorum ama o esnada zamanı da iyi değerlendirmek adına öncelikle konuşmacılarımızı hızlıca size bir tanıştırmak istiyorum. Daha sonra da belli bir sıra içerisinde her konuşmacıya yaklaşık 10-15 dakikalık bir süre tanıyıp paylaşımlarını, bilgilerini aktarmalarını isteyeceğiz. Daha sonra da bu esnada soru cevaplarınızı da teknik arkadaşların belirttiği gibi Q&A yerinden bizlere iletebilirseniz mümkün olduğunca interaktif bir panel oluşturmaya çalışacağız. Konuşmacılarımız arasında bugün UNDR'dan Nick var, Nicholas Ramos. UNDR'ın dış ilişkileriyle alakalı çalışmalar yapıyor. Bir diğer konuşmacımız Lina Liakovu. Lina da hem Avrupa hem Orta Doğu'da dayanıklı dirençli şehirler network'ünün içerisinde ve Selanik'te bir belediye başkanlığı yardımcılığı yapmış. Epey bir tecrübesi var. Özellikle de hem kalkınma ölçeğinde hem de şehir ölçeğinde. Ben Smith de aramıza katılacak diye ümit ediyorum. Hızlıca benle alakalı da bir bilgi vereyim. Ben Smith'te aramızdaki çevre danışmanları arasında çalışan bir arkadaşımız ve özellikle İngiltere, Avrupa, Avustralya'da 18 yıllık bir özel sektör ve kamu sektörüne yaptığı çalışmalar, projeler var. Özellikle küresel şehirler, enerji verimliliği, şehirlerdeki düşük karbonlu ve yenilenebilir enerji çalışmaları, sürdürülebilir atık yönetimi ve iklim değişikliğine uyum, şehirlerin direnci konularında birçok çalışması var. Diğer bir konuşmacımız Lorenzo. Lorenzo Barcelona'dan katılıyor bize bu toplantıya bugün. Ve Urban Resilience Research Network'ün başkanlığını yapıyor. Aynı zamanda Lorenzo bazı araştırmalar yapıyor ve özellikle yönetişim, yani governance dediğimiz konuyu şehir planlama sürecinde nasıl ele alacağımız konusunda çalışmaları var. Bugün Lorenzo Barcelona örneğini de bizimle paylaşacak. Daha sonra Melike Hanım var. Melike Kuş Doğa Koruma Merkezi'nde Toprak ve Su diye çeviriyoruz galiba. Programını yönetiyor, onun koordinatörü. Ve aynı zamanda bir doktorası var. Yer Bilimleri, ODTÜ'deki Yer Bilimleri Enstitüsü'nde. Ve bugün bize özellikle tarım, gıda sektörü arasındaki ilişkiyi ve gıda güvenliğiyle gıda üretim sistemleri arasındaki sürdürülebilirliği ve bunun iklim değişikliğine uyum konusunda faaliyetleri, yaptığı çalışmalar hakkında bilgi verecekler. Tabii ki bugün aslında bu toplantıların organizasyonunda da büyük emeği olan, bizleri de sağ olsun buraya e, ilişkilendiren Betül Hanım konuşmasını yapacak. Betül Hanım'ı aslında katılımcıların çoğu tanıyordur İstanbul Büyükşehir Belediyesi'nde. Bugün Betül Hanım özellikle belediyenin dirençli şehirler konusundaki çalışmalarıyla ilgili bilgi verecek. Ben aramıza katıldı. Evet, görüyorum. Hi Ben, you're welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, great. So we just made a small introduction and we can just start to use the time efficiently. Okay Ben?
Yes.
Okay. Ben o zaman ilk konuşmacımız Nick UNDRR adına konuşmasını yapmak için davet ediyorum. Yes Nick, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Nori, for inviting me here today, and nice to join the rest of the colleagues on the panel and to greet the audience that we have with us here today. Let me see if I can just make sure that my screen. Oh, if I can just share my screen. Just clicking it over. Is there a way I can? Sorry, I can't share my screen.
Teknik destek alabilir miyiz? It's okay.
Yes. Sorry, I'm just share. Sorry. Well, okay. Well, I'm having trouble sharing my screen here, so I'll just perhaps just discuss a bit of what I had planned. So yes, Nori, thank you. And as I mentioned, my name is Nick Ramos. I'm from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, based here in Brussels with the regional office for Europe. But we have regional offices all over the globe. We're covering 55 member states here throughout the region, Europe, Central Asia, Southeastern Europe, and that broader definition of countries. So actually today is quite an interesting day. October 13th is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, in fact. And today's focus in particular is on disaster risk governance, which actually aligns with one of the Sendai framework targets. So the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which was agreed by member states in 2015, basically sets the DRR agenda globally going forward up to 2030 in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Treaty. So one of the targets there, the target E, as it's known, is target relating to disaster risk governance and the need for disaster risk reduction strategies and plans to be put in place by 2020. So there's been mixed progress in achieving this goal. But the focus of today, and we're with a number of partners and throughout various different regions and so on, is really focusing on the importance of disaster risk governance and the need to have these strategies and plans in place. But obviously, all this is being done in the context of COVID-19, which, as we know, has wreaked havoc on the world and Europe. We know now, we're never going to want to go back to as we had it as business as usual. COVID-19 disaster has demonstrated what's been outlined in recently reports around the global assessment for disaster risk reduction, namely that risk is systemic and crises are cascading. So disasters are rapidly producing further disasters. They become more complex and deadly. And we know everyone is affected, but not everyone is affected equally. So with that, the focus really needs to be on prevention and to save lives. So actually today we released a report on the human cost of disasters from the past 20 years to mark this International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. And basically this confirms how extreme weather events have come to dominate the disaster landscape in the 21st century. So the statistics in the report are from the Emergency Events Database, the MDAT database maintained by the Center for Research and the Epidemiology of Disasters, CRED, which records disasters which have killed 10 or more people, affected 100 or more people, resulted in a declared state of emergency or called for international assistance. And what we've seen is really a dramatic rise in the period of the past 20 years compared to the 20 years previously. In the period of 2000 to 2019, there were 7,348 major recorded disaster events, claiming 1.23 million lives. If you take that figure, compare it to the 1980 to 1999, we see just 4,212 disasters, claiming 1.1 million lives. So much of this difference is actually explained by the rise of climate-related disasters. No surprise there, including extreme weather events. There were just 3,600 climate-related events from 1980 to 1999. It's nearly doubled that in the 20-year period that followed to nearly 7,000 climate-related disasters. So the report also records major increases in other categories of disasters, including drought. There's also been a rise in geophysical events, including earthquakes and tsunamis, which have killed more people than any other natural hazards under review in this report. In terms of economic losses, we know that increasing exposure of critical infrastructure and economic assets has been the major cause of long-term increases in economic loss from disasters, and shows the economic incentives for building in many hazard-prone areas continues to outweigh the perceived disaster risks. And as I mentioned earlier, the systemic risk understanding is becoming more and more clear. We can just take, for instance, a quite common natural hazard such as a storm. We can see how it cascades into a systematic series of events that follow that. There might be economic losses from different energy production facilities, transport networks that have been destroyed. There could be industrial disasters that follow from such an event, environmental disasters, social and economic stress, leading to a whole wide series of effects. So what do we see as a critical component for managing and reducing the worst effects of disasters? And that goes back to the original message that I mentioned earlier about the need for and the importance of disaster risk governance. So the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres actually mentioned today that bad situations only get worse without good disaster risk governance in place. And we see this very prominently with the COVID-19 situation. We know without appropriate institutions, policies, and collaborative frameworks, the best plans and strategies will fail. So as I mentioned, disaster risk governance is entering a critical period. We've seen how it's suddenly and overwhelmingly being put to the test by the COVID-19 pandemic. As I mentioned, the target E cutoff is this year. So when we're talking about disaster risk governance, we're talking about, for example, adoption, enforcement of hazard resistant building codes and standards, planning and environmental regulations, and the overall strengthening of disaster risk governance through legislation, institutions, and systems. So we know that extensive evidence indicates that good disaster risk governance springs from collaboration and alliances among mechanisms and institutions to reduce disaster risk and pave the way for sustainable development. We just take a couple of examples from the most recent situation with COVID-19 to take one in Latin America. Uruguay's response to the COVID-19 pandemic has resonated through the entire region. Through the formulation, in particular, of a comprehensive body that brought together decision makers, scientists, and academics, it's become possible to apply strategies and plans that shape the management of the health crisis. There's only been 1,500 infections, and reduce the risk of socioeconomic threats that have shaken so many other countries. A key underpinning factor in this as well is the importance of science and technology. In the importance of setting the evidence basis for these disaster risk governance measures. So all these strategies and plans need to be backed up on data and information that allows the construction of, let's say, threat projections and risk scenarios that are intended to reduce the impact of disasters, especially in populations affected by poverty, exclusion, and inequality. So just to conclude, as I mentioned, with the importance of science and technology to underpin these DRR strategies and good risk governance, the importance of building long-term resilience with finance and measurable strategies and targets. They need to improve knowledge through regular multi-hazard assessments and systemic accounting of losses. And then we've seen how COVID-19 has put the spotlight on how we understand risk. That risks are systemic, crises are cascading. So we need a multi-hazard, multi-sectoral approach to not just look at one risk in isolation, but to see how how do we address these risks in a more holistic manner with an all of government, all of society approach to manage these risks. So maybe I'll just end it there, and thank you again for inviting me today. Thanks.
Nick, thank you very much. Nick'in anlattığı çerçevede aslında yönetişim çerçevesinin altını çizdi. İnternette kolayca bulunabiliyor ve orada son 2000 ile 2019 arasındaki kayıtlar ve bunun iklimle nasıl bir ilişkisi olduğunu çok iyi bir şekilde anlatıyor. Bu arada sorularınız olursa lütfen bunları Q&A çerçevesinde iletin. Bunları belli bir sırada ben konuşmacılara ayrıca ileteceğim. Ben kendi sorularımı da ayrıca hazırlıyorum. Ben Nick'in belirlediği o UNDRR Sendai Framework'un Target E, Hedef E çerçevesindeki koyduğu approach'la özellikle Lina'dan, ikinci konuşmacımız olarak Lina'dan onun deneyimlerini hem bir Selanik Belediye çerçevesindeki deneyimi hem de bu dirençlilik, dayanıklılık dediğimiz resilience'ın nasıl hayata geçirildiği, uygulandığı, operationalizing örneklerini duymak istiyorum. Lina, is it fine for you?
Hi everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Lina Lako. I'm the Managing Director for Europe and the Middle East for the Resilient Cities Network. We are the continuation of the 100 Resilient Cities program that was pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation. And we are a network of cities from across the globe committed in strengthening their resilience. We are a global city-led non-profit, and we try to bring together knowledge, practice, partnerships to empower our member cities. So my responsibility is to work with our 21 member cities across Europe and the Middle East. For the last 7 years, we've been working with these cities, almost 97, 98 across the globe, in trying to integrate the resilience thinking into their day-to-day city operations. And we do that through the appointment of this innovative position of the Chief Resilience Officer and Resilience Office. and the development of a resilience plan or a strategy, and then, of course, resilience policies and projects. To date, more than 85 holistic urban resilience strategies have been published and endorsed by local authorities, and more than 80 chief resilience officers are institutionalized, embedded into the local authorities. But before going into the specifics of how we did it and also what we did in, and I will use my experience also from working in Thessaloniki around resilience, I would like just to talk about what resilience is and how we define resilience. And resilience for us is the capacity of the individuals, the communities, the institutions, the systems within a city. The city doesn't just survive or adapt, but further grows, no matter the kind of chronic stresses and acute shocks it experiences. And for us, and for me, there are two things here that I would like to highlight. The one is that this is not only about disasters or kind of big shocks. This is also about this kind of long-term stresses that we usually call these slow burning disasters. An example is the systemic racism that we see, for example, now in the US, that can trigger larger events or exacerbate the impact of shocks. And I think the current health pandemic has showed us how vulnerable we are and how a crisis such as a health pandemic can actually impact directly or indirectly almost all the different systems within the city. The second thing that I want to focus in terms of how we define resilience and what resilience is resilience is not just about surviving or even adapting to the new normal or to the new condition, but it's actually how the city, in our case, the system in general, can become stronger and better prepared than before to address known and unknown risks. So it's not about what are the hazards now, but also trying to understand what are the future trends, what are potential future risks, and create the necessary processes, governance structures in order to fortify its systems. So resilience is and should be seen as a strategic approach rather than a sectoral theme. And also, you don't build resilience or you don't become resilient overnight. Resilience is a process, is a way of thinking, of planning, of acting, and it actually requires constant change and constant awareness. This is also why governance and trying to operationalize and embed resilience thinking into the day-to-day operations of a city authority, in our case, is pivotal. Now, as I said, we've been working with the cities for the last almost 7 years. I have the experience both of working within a city authority as the deputy mayor for resilience, which was a completely new agenda, but also working at the international organizations such as the Resilient Cities Network, where you actually can see and compare and contrast better the differentiations, also regional, or in terms of size of cities, and what are like the different ways that a city addresses and incorporates this kind of thinking. So just a few characteristics of the way that we've been working with cities and the work that the cities are doing. So as they're trying to build their internal capacity and the internal understanding around what resilience is, the most tangible way is actually, building a strategy or building an agenda. But this is just a vehicle in order to build this kind of internal understanding of why are you doing that, and what is the narrative for the city? Why should the city think about resilience, and why should the city incorporate resilience in the way of the way it acts and it thinks and it plans? The way that we've approached it, and we've actually collaborated very closely with Ben, who's also in the panel, and with Arup, in that we are using the city resilience framework as a kind of guiding vehicle for better understanding the holistic approach of resilience. And this is an approach that is on the one hand, data-driven, but also it's deeply participatory. And for us, participation is not just, internal participation, having all the different, agencies and departments around the same table, but actually including all the non-traditional actors, the grassroots communities, the elderly population, the students, all the different communities within the city, in trying to create this kind of common understanding and common narrative around why is resilience important for me as a citizen, as an inhabitant of the city, and why is resilience important for us as a collective. So far, we had more than 60,000 people across our different member cities that participated in this dialogue, which means that the resilience strategy as an end product is actually a product of consensus among the different stakeholders of the cities. It's not just a product of the city. It's not the ownership is not the mayor or the city leader, but it's actually something that is being shared and co-owned by the city with a small c. The second element and characteristic is understanding the vulnerabilities, which is important, and the risks, but also understanding the strengths. And there are different reasons why this is important. I will give an example. We had city leaders in cities that didn't want to hear the word disaster. They thought that this is a very negative approach. They wanted to give resilience only a positive connotation. They wanted for them resilience to be a vision for the future and something very positive in the perception of the people. Now, this doesn't mean that in the process, we don't need to understand and have a deep understanding of what are vulnerabilities, our risks, and hazards, and create the necessary systems. But it's also important to give this kind of positive connotation and create this kind of vision of the future, and also build on what is already what is already going well in the city. So it's not just identifying the weaknesses, but also identifying the strengths and the opportunities. So in some even cases, we see resilience being, like the foresight department of the city, trying to give, again, not only what are the risks in the future that might come, but also what are the opportunities, the new things, the trends that the city needs to be aware of and try to kind of integrate and align with. The third element is trying to identify this kind of multi-benefit transformative actions. So you understand, you do your assessment, you do it together with your community, and then you move on trying to identify how are you going to build your resilience. And as we know, resilience is a generational thing. You need multiple years to actually strengthen your systems. But what is important is try to identify these transformative actions that can both benefit the communities and the citizens now, but while also future-proofing the systems to potential risks or to the future in the end of the day. And this is crucial if we want to garner political support, which is also the only way to actually embed resilience. Because it's actually pretty impossible to usually for a city leader to put money or to put their political capital behind something that is it will not benefit his term, in a sense, his political term. So I think it is important to be realistic and try to understand how the resilience agenda can benefit the city now, while also having this kind of more long-term approach. For us, and we've been working with cities in creating projects on the ground, but the actual success is the governance transformation. And for us, for example, we measure success by the institutionalization of the Chief Resilience Officer, because in many cases, resilience means nothing within the city, and this is a new position, and nobody understands what it is. And then after a couple of years, we see, and we've seen with examples, how the resilience officer, the Chief Resilience Officer, becomes an integrated part of of the system. And we have seen different ways that resilience is embedded within a local authority. It's a very simple and easy example for is Paris, where this was like a short-term position of a chief resilience officer under the
Chief Resilience Officer adı altında bir dayanıklılık
showing results. This has become a permanent office. There was change in the resilience officer position, but still this is there, and it's permanent, and it has integrated itself into the different kind of system and processes. It has its own budget, its mandate, etc. In other cases, actually, resilience is embedded through a political position, such as a deputy mayor that has this mandate. In other cases, we might not see a very strong chief resilience officer, for example, but resilience is embedded into the constitution of the city, such as in Panama, for example, in a lot of our Latin American cities, or resilience is a filter within the budget and the yearly budget of the city. This is an example from New Orleans. Or, for example, resilience, the chief resilience officer, or resilience training is a specific module where all the employees of the different departments need to go through, as for example in LA. So there are also very different ways of embedding resilience. Or there is a city that might have done all of them, and that's great. But in most cases, you see either, every year there is a different kind of an additional maturity in what resilience is. In some cases, when you have a political transition, you might see cases where, the city might backtrack until the new administration actually understands what is happening, and it might change the direction. But in the end of the day, what is important is try to ensure that there is continuity internally into the operations of the city, and there is a continuity of actually this kind of awareness of resilience and awareness of why we're doing it and what we need to do. It also depends a lot on the existing context and then the national context. So, for example, in the UK, there's a tradition around resilience. It is strongly connected with the civil contingencies. Resilience is already institutionalized. The challenge, for example, in the UK is actually how you move from a kind of a more shock-related and disaster-related response to this kind of more developmental agenda, strategic approach around resilience. In continental Europe, such as Rotterdam or even Milan, actually resilience is more connected with climate adaptation and climate action. And it might be the entry point. It doesn't mean it ends there, but it's better understood to this approach of, yes, we understand that this is a broader issue, but, because our climate change agenda is very strong, this is in a sense the entry point around that. In our US cities, resilience is very much connected with social resilience and equity, because the cities there have understood that if you don't address the root causes, you will not be able to actually future-proof your system. So we have many cases. Atlanta is one of them, Dallas, and many others. Minneapolis, now we've seen also with the demonstrations, where resilience is also, they see resilience from a more kind of resilient community perspective. Or in New Zealand, where resilience is very embedded into the strategic direction and to the infrastructure planning of the city. Or in India, where in fact, we had to work with a national scale in order to ensure that resilience as an agenda and as an approach was actually connected and was acknowledged at the local level because of the different kind of governance structures within the country. We've also seen cities such as, for example, in Tbilisi, in Georgia, where it was the first time for the city that engaged with its civil society. And cities in the UK might might not understand how this is possible, but actually for Tbilisi, it was the first time that a strategy went out for consultation, that civil society groups were invited into the municipality to discuss around what are their issues, what are their weaknesses, what do they see that the city needs to strengthen itself and its system. Now, COVID, because it's a crisis that hit everyone, regardless of the size of the city or the geography and location, this has also become a testament for us of the need and the value of connecting, of cities connecting with each other, of having this kind of real-time problem solving, of credible information sharing. And we saw it, in real time, especially during the first kind of lockdown. And within this crisis, a percentage of our chief resilience officers and the resilience office actually worked in response, in the crisis management. Almost all of them are working on the recovery approach. So on the recovery planning. So currently, our community has focused its attention, one, trying to assess the impact. And we usually do this preliminary resilience assessment as part of the resilience strategy. Some of the cities are actually redoing their preliminary resilience assessment based on what is currently happening. Some of them are actually redoing their resilience strategies or trying to reprioritize. Others are trying to further mature and identify this kind of shovel-ready, multiple benefit projects to add into the recovery budgets. Some have focused more on specific systems that were very weak, such as the food security or water security, especially in our cities in Africa. And others, of course, and let's be honest, are trying to save their jobs because of the different fiscal constraints that local authorities are also underway. And this is always a grave reality of what is happening also within the city. Now,
we are almost out of time.
Yes, I'm finishing.
Sure.
Now, we've heard a lot about resilient recovery and the opportunities to rethink our cities, but cities will not become magically green or magically healthy. We need new governance structures, and I think Nicholas made the case. We need new partnerships. We need capacity for the cities, and we need to create awareness for both the current and the future risks. And I think there is momentum for resilience, and I think cities have shown a great leadership in this space. Thank you.
Wow, it is really very fruitful. Sorry, I will switch in Turkish. Lina'dan gerçekten çok ilginç ve birbiriyle düşündürücü de bilgiler aldık. Hem yaptığı farklı şehirlerdeki çalışmalar ve bunun aslında tanımdan ziyade nasıl yapılacağına yönelik ve burada yönetişimin rolü ve bu yönetişimin de farklı kültürlerde, şehirlerde nasıl algılandığına yönelik çok güzel bilgiler verdi. Zaten benden bahsetti. Ben aynı zamanda biraz önce tanıttığım gibi UK-based çalışıyor. İngiltere'de, Londra'da galiba. Onu da soracağım birazdan. Ve aslında Nick'in bahsettiği sistem çerçevesi ve UNDRR çerçevesini Lina'nın bahsettiği şehir ölçeğinde ve aslında bir yönetişimin ne kadar önemli olduğu bir deneyimle birkaç ülkeden bahsetti. Ve ben burada bir sistemin nasıl kırılabileceği ve bunu sistem çerçevesindeki o sistemik şokun nasıl bir kazançlı sonuca götürebileceğini ve burada da aslında gerekli olan da o değişimin sadece sistem değil, bireyle beraber ve aynı zamanda düşünceyle, hislerle beraber nasıl yapılabileceğine yönelik güzel örnekler verecek. Ben sözü Ben'e veriyorum. And Ben, now you're based in London or?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Okay. Ben gördüğünüz gibi Londra'dan katılıyor ve gerçekten Avrupa'nın farklı yerlerinden, farklı iklim ve kültürlerden katılımcılar var bugün. So Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuri, and hello, everybody. Thanks for having me, and it's nice to see some friendly faces on the other end of the Zoom call. So yeah, my name is Ben Smith, as has been said. I'm a director for Arup based in London in the UK. I studied environmental science, and I've been a sustainable development professional since 2000, but also have done quite a lot of work in resilience, as Lena mentioned. I co-authored the UN Scorecard on Disaster Risk Resilience for Cities, and I've supported about 10 cities through the City Resilient Network to develop their urban resilience plans. I also lead Arup's partnership with C40 cities, and I've just begun a project in Istanbul to look at a climate action plan for the city there. And Betul, we've worked together in the past on some previous work, and I'm also supporting another Arup team at the moment looking at a process about participatory planning in Istanbul, which is really interesting, although I'm only on the edges of that project. So I got the briefing for this session, sustainable resilience, discuss. So last night I was thinking about what does that mean, and I give some thought to that. So, I mean, to me, sustainability implies continuity. So it's something that's replenishable and can continue without new or fresh inputs over time. And so I would describe that as being something that's in balance with nature, working with nature. Resilience is the ability to bounce back after a shock or a stress, and that can be natural or man-made. So it could be like an earthquake or a hurricane or tornado, but it could also be a terrorist attack or a chemical spill or something like that. So if sustainability starts with a functioning system, then resilience starts perhaps with a broken system, or at least one that's so far stretched that we might expect it to break quite soon. And so I would argue that when looking around cities globally, some of the biggest stresses that we face, and Lena said this as well from her experience in the 100 city network, are those stresses that are connected with nature loss and climate change. And a lot of my work is focusing on that at the moment. So these things are often described as the climate or the ecological emergency. And they actually connect to so many more of the stresses that we see in our cities around the world, whether that's poor air quality or, in fact, even the pandemic that we're all dealing with now. So I don't want to be alarmist, but perhaps when we look objectively at the planet over the last 100 years, we might say that we are breaking it. Earth's temperature has changed more in the last century than in the previous 10,000 years. The Arctic ice could be gone entirely within the next few decades. We're cutting down 15 billion trees a year. So that's nearly 2 trees for every person living on the planet. Half of the fertile land on Earth is now used for farming, and 60% of the mass of animals on Earth is taken up by animals that we are raising to eat. And Earth's temperature could rise by 4 degrees by the start of the 22nd century. So this is all sort of pretty major kind of global and frightening statistics. And it sometimes feels a bit far removed from us living in cities because we kind of see that that's outside of our control. But actually, we are the demand centers which are creating a lot of that's happening elsewhere in some of the rural settings around the planet. Most cities in the global north, and I would imagine Istanbul included in this, are net importers of greenhouse gas emissions through the demand that they drive, through their supply chains from the things that we all consume in our daily lives. We led a project with C40 on exactly this subject in 2019, which was really sort of enlightening to see. Clearly there are some cities in the global south which are net producers, and they're but most of the places where we and who are living a comfortable lifestyle live in the global north are net importers of emissions. So look, I didn't want to sort of bring the mood down. I mean, clearly that's all very scary. But the important thing is, once you recognize those things are happening, then, and if you have a passion, as I'm sure we all do, to try and reverse some of those things, there's lots of things that we can be doing in our cities to reverse some of those trends. And Lena's work and Betul's work in Istanbul is starting to kind of get into that. And I think that is where I wanted to sort of take this conversation, because I think regardless of whether you're starting from a point of view of sustainability or urban resilience, ultimately what you're doing is you're leading a consultative process to develop a strategy. And in that strategy, typically it's going to be a number of pillars and then a number of projects and actions. And in each one of those projects, actions, or interventions, however you want to describe them, there are opportunities to really, really keep an eye on the benefits that you can deliver through those projects. So if we just imagine for a moment that well, it doesn't matter, to be honest, whether your primary lens is sustainable development, climate change, or resilience. But if you're creating a plan, it might break down into a number of different areas. This is different in different cities. It depends on what the focus is for the city, as Lena said. Some of them are coming at it from climate change, some of them coming with an equity lens, different in different places. But at the pillar level, maybe there's a pillar around food resilience, maybe there's one around transport or buildings, energy or waste. And what do the interventions look like under those pillars? I mean, in food resilience, perhaps it's about local food growing, or it's about thinking about the supply chain resilience, so where your food is coming from and making sure that the supply chain is not interrupted, as we looked at quite extensively in the work that we did in London. In the pillar around transport, perhaps you're trying to get a project started around a bus rapid transit system, or to integrate new cycle lanes to promote walking and cycling and less pollution from traffic. If it's buildings, perhaps that's about retrofitting schools for energy efficiency, but it could also be about alleviating summertime overheating, responding to the urban heat island, perhaps incorporating green roofs. And the work we did in Rotterdam, they made a plan to create 10 kilometers squared of green roofs in the roofs across the city of there. And so I would argue that however you break your strategy down, and whatever your pillars, and almost whatever your lens is, you will end up with these types of interventions that will be fairly common between different cities, and where there is an opportunity to always think about what you can do through those projects to focus on the benefits. And we typically do that when we're doing our strategy work. So we might start with a long list of ideas of things that we can do under each of those pillars, and then we have a conversation in the city to decide how to prioritize those ideas. So which ones are going to be the best value for money? Which ones are going to deliver the best co-benefits or resilience dividend, to use the language coined by the 100 Resilient Cities programme. So what that means is, if you're starting a project to do one thing, what other things can you also achieve at the same time through that project? Now, I'm really still, even though this is a concept which I've been talking about now for a number of years, it still excites me to think about, because innovation can happen all the time. And there's different ways of thinking about the benefits these projects can bring. So if, for example, you're the city of Paris and you decide to take up all the tarmac in your schoolyards to create little green oases, so that you're to deliver a primary benefit around reducing heat island, you can also create places where out of school hours people can visit from the local community, they can convene, and it can drive sort of a positive social cohesion. If you're designing a massive stormwater tank to store runoff in the city of Rotterdam, you can use it when it's not flooded to host sports events or community events, and it can become part of a really important city square. And if you're in the city of Istanbul and you're thinking about how you create corridors to evacuate in an earthquake scenario, you can also think about how those corridors can be green and what benefit they can provide when there isn't an earthquake. So I would say that for almost every project example, there's many different ways to layer up and think about the benefits that you can deliver through those projects. I would agree with Lena completely in saying that it's one thing to kind of have an idea for a project that you might include in a strategy. It's a completely another thing to see that project actually happen. There's so many barriers along the way, and it really is a constant effort, and it takes people with passion and drive in each of the cities to make those projects come off of the drawing board and actually get delivered. You know, and it's not even enough necessarily to get your ideas into the city plans. A lot of the ideas that do go into city plans don't actually end up getting realized. So if, for example, I talk about now the Greater London Authority or London, where we've just recently finished the resilience plan, we had an initiative in that, which was about using meanwhile space. And when I say meanwhile space, what I mean is space in between developments happening. So when a building has been knocked down, it's empty for a while, maybe 2 or 3 years before another building is built. What can you do in that space that is providing a social value for the people around, perhaps stalls for buying things, or just community events for parties, or whatever it is. And it's obviously different in the COVID context, clearly. But the point is that is an action which was supported and included within the Resilient City Plan, but actually requires a huge amount of other initiatives to work alongside that to actually make it become a reality. You need to start developing a database of where these sites exist. You need to change the policy to make it attractive for people to do that. You need to engage with developers to make them understand that the community won't take that space away from them forever, and they will one day be able to develop that site. And you need to engage the community to tell them that at one point in time, they'll have to give that site back to the developer, because the developer will need to do something with it, and they will go to another site that's maybe around the corner. So these things are not quick, they're going to take time. And we've been working in the cities now for 5 or 6 years, and we're still starting to see some of the ideas coming through and getting delivered. And it will be, you know, it could be a lifetime's work yet as well. Not all of the good ideas are necessarily viable or feasible straight away. So I can tell you that personally, I would really, really like to go out and regenerate 200 acres or hectares of land in the UK and make a rewilding project. But I can't figure out a way to do that. I can't afford it with my own money, and I can't find a way to get people to invest just yet. So I have to keep thinking about that project. And I'm sure there's lots of other projects that you've seen happening in cities where you know it's a good idea in your heart, but you can't quite make the case. You have to keep working to kind of create that case. I've been involved now in a charity which I was helped set up for 5 years, which was all focusing on urban greening in London. And it's only now that we're starting to employ our first staff members. We've not got enough funding to actually employ people after 5 years. It just goes to show how long you have to stick at these things if you're serious about them. And you have to win friends along the way, and you have to knock on a lot of doors. And I'm going to finish my presentation today just on this point around building alliances to create the change that we need to see. And the City Resilient Network, the acronym for which I'm still getting used to, has done that really successfully with 100 cities over the last 5 years. We're seeing lots of other networks. UNSDR has a large network of member cities, as does C40, and there's many, many others. And what I would say is I think we've been really successful through all those organizations of building alliances which are perhaps quite siloed, so that we have an alliance of cities, we have an alliance of businesses, for example, like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We maybe have alliances of different citizens or charitable groups. But in every city, all of those types of organizations need to come together to deliver on the actions that are included in the strategy. So what does an alliance look like for a city that has individuals and citizens, community groups, charities, businesses, and government departments all contributing around one single plan? Because almost every strategic plan I've seen in a city, the mayor normally signs off the plan by saying, "This is my vision, but I can't deliver it by myself. I need your help." And he or she is making a call out to everybody else in the city to get involved and support that thing. So for me, I'm really interested in this idea of how you build alliances within cities made up of multiple different types of actors, but with a common purpose, whether that's around climate change, sustainability, resilience. I think really it's about delivering the suite of projects that the city has already identified in most cases and just needs to build a case for, win support for, and make happen. So I'll stop talking there.
Great timing. Thank you very much. Benedik'in konuşması için çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Yani yine aslında o işbirlikleri ve yönetişim çerçevesi ve müşterekler çerçevesinde o common purpose için nasıl bunu yapabileceğimiz en büyük challenge gibi gözüküyor, önümüzdeki en büyük soru gibi. Ben İstanbul'dan da bahsetti. İstanbul'da Büyükşehir Belediyesi çerçevesinde yapılan çalışmalar noktasında Betül Hanım'ı dinleyeceğiz. Buyurun Betül Hanım.
Hello, everyone. Have a good day. Thanks for all attending this Congress. And first of all, I would like to thank organizing and steering committee of idRC 2020 and our moderator Nuri and the other panelists, Nicole, Dina, Ben, Melike, and Lorenzo, for explaining, sharing, discussing, and highlighting key points of resilience and sustainability. And during my speech, I try to answer two questions. Why must our cities be sustainable resilience, and how to make Istanbul sustainable resilience? And let's start. And you know that our environment is changing and our world becomes ever increasingly urban. And we cannot abandon cities' future, the cities' fate. We must do something right away, because you know that the cities are more densely populated and have more challenges than ever before. We know that the urban life is today's world reality, and most people choose to live in urban area because of some reasons. And UN say that 1 in every 3 people will live in cities in near future. It's okay, but the important things here is When the city population are increasing, but also the risk is increasing in this area. Approximately, you know that 700 cities with at least 500,000 inhabitants were at high risk of exposure at least one of natural disaster. But not only disaster risk, but also environmental problems and urbanization choices and the development obstacle significantly affect the future of the city. For example, we know we talk about population is increasing, and also water use has been increasing worldwide, driven by socio-economic development and changing consumption patterns. And cities should take a precaution against the water insecurity and the resource shortage. And you know that cities are responsible for mostly consuming natural resources and the energy. The energy is the main contributor to climate change and produce around 60% of greenhouse gases. And most of the energy being generated from, you know, that a fossil fuel. And the remainder of energy is supplied through the renewable sources. Considering that the fossil fuel reserves will decrease over the time. For example, according to World Meter data, for natural gas, about 2 generations. And besides this negative impact of fossil fuel usage on the climate, and the global energy demand is gradually increasing, it's very important to cities accelerate their efforts on renewable energy system in these days. Another problem is soil loss, and Melike is going to talk about water and soil, but I say a little something about it. We lose fertile soil. For example, urbanization caused the loss of between millions hectares of prime agricultural land year. In order to protect our future, we have to protect our land, topsoil, and water. Besides these challenges, of course, the disaster caused by natural and climate events are also measured threat to existing of sustainability of the physical, social, economic, historical, and cultural structure of the cities. Last 20 years before 2070, there was about 7,300 disasters was experienced at global scale, and 4.5 billion people affected, 1.5 billion dead, approximately 3,000 billion USA economic losses. And there's a lot of bad impact of the city because of the disaster. And disaster are enormous danger for life. But there's a disaster risk reduction is one of the most fundamental goals for the future of the cities. If precautions are not taken, natural and climate events will continue to cause loss of life, economic damage, environment, and natural degradation in upcoming years. While disaster and climate crisis continues to dominate the living space of the world, the urban developers continue to harm environmental degradation, pollution like air, water, soil, light, noise, and biodiversity loss, desertification, destruction of forests are greater threats for the future of life. If humans keep harming the environment and do not take any precaution, we will unfortunately have to bear bad consequences of our choices. Unfortunately, also, living in the cities does not offer the same opportunities to each other in terms of quality of life. Poverty, inequality, injustice, security, and income distribution have become important challenges that cities around the world have to face. Also, cities host approximately 26 million refugees who left their homeland due to the reasons such as cruelty, war, or bad economy. Cities must develop a strategy for these fragility groups of area and for resilience. Let's look at some Istanbul. And for Istanbul, the big problem is our big problem is the earthquake, as you know. After the Kocaeli earthquake 1999, there was a really big awareness of earthquake hazard, risk, and vulnerability, and lots of quality studies have been done after this awareness, and lots of study is going to do. And when we look at the numbers about the earthquake, if there's an earthquake, it's estimated that approximately 70% of buildings have moderate or more than moderate damage in Istanbul. It's approximately 200,000 buildings. I can't imagine this number. And when we look at this building collapse, building damage, or etc., there will be approximately 20,000 loss of life, lots of seriously wounded and hospitalization. And because of this damage, also there will be a 25 million ton debris in Istanbul. I don't know how to collect them and put this debris in any space of Istanbul. And approximately 180 billion Turkish lira economic loss consists of structural and non-structural damage. But these numbers shows non-cost of action against the earthquake. We can decrease this number if we want. And now for Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, we have to start our rebuilt building that have the possibility to damage or by conducting urban transformation project. And there's a lot of studies making Istanbul community must be resilient against the Istanbul. Besides this earthquake, we also fight the climate change. Climate change really affects Istanbul. When we look at our reports, Istanbul climate change reports, it says that lots of numbers are increasing, like annual mean temperature increasing between 1 or 4.5 Celsius degrees, heavy rain days is increasing, and the drought longest dry period is prolonging, and sea level is rising. So we have lots of challenges as a Istanbul. But not only this one, but also 5% of displaced people has lived in Istanbul because of the contamination. Our biodiversity is losing. There's a biodiversity loss. For example, in 1970, there were 6 types of fish in our sea. Now, only 20 types of fish are swimming in our sea, as you see. And traffic is the most important problem, maybe because in a day, I spend about 5 hours in a traffic from my house to my work, and then again return my home, and wasting time 2.5 times more in traffic in Istanbul. And we also have food dependency, energy dependency, and water scarcity. And you know, there's a lot of challenges for our cities, and we have to do something for this. So what is the urban resilience? Urban resilience for us, we explains like a coping skill of cities against the acute shock and chronic stresses. Or urban resilience is a defense mechanism that city has built on its structure by taking lessons from its parts, understanding its current situation well, and foreseeing its future. Just COVID, urban resilience is the city's immunity against the challenges. In some way, how should we build an urban resilience for sustainable urban life? In order to build an urban resilience, firstly, we need an approach to embed this concept in our daily and corporate life. For Istanbul, we really need this approach. And Istanbul, whose population and population density have increased over the years, which struggle with local and global problems, could solve their problems on various topics and at different scales with an approach based on urban resilience and sustainability. And this approach should be with holistic perspective, integrated evolution, and transdisciplinary effort. Like among the choices for cities on sustainability, risk reduction, respect for the nature, human values, and right development. For this approach, it should be respect for the life, and the human values should be the primary value. And in the face of global and local problems, disaster risk reduction should be the goal, and it should be programmed and initiated with the suitable investment programs in line with this goal as soon as possible. And urbanization perspective should be shaped around the safe, livable, environment-friendly, fair, and inclusive vision in providing the city with the ability to absorb, adapt, and transform in the face of problems. Accurate resource management for sustainability and reserve capacity for the continuity system and the service are aspects that are crucial for sustainable development. The way to integrate the sustainable resilience approach to WALST lies at creating an urban resilience index, like Lina said. And with this index, we need some establishment like a city resilience office, but we say this urban resilience center because we think that if there is a problem, if there's a challenges in Istanbul, it affects not only Istanbul but also its area. Because of this reason, in Istanbul, for Istanbul, we need an urban resilience center in order to coordinate, in order to fight all kind of challenges. And this center needs to be established based on a meticulously designed, robust, manageable, and sustainable system. And it must be eliminated. If there is an urban resilience center in Istanbul, it's really eliminate the confusion caused by distributed responsibilities and repetitive work. And it's really make easy decision-making process for us and related implementation in Istanbul. With the scope of this center, bringing together stakeholders will support the process, providing a broad consultation environment for the coordination lacking in the all-related topics. In this concept, designing, planning, establishing urban resilience center as a specific independent and please supra-political will enable the formation of a platform and a center in which city experts, stakeholders, residents, and decision makers could act together for the city on the local global space. And I'm coming to the end of my speech. Maybe repeat again, urban resilience is a transformative, evolutive, systemic, and dynamic process, and Istanbul must build with a sustainable resilience. Not only it aims dynamically to reduce risk, prevent a better manage or recovery from disaster, but also at building adaptive capacities, absorbing capabilities, transformative abilities in short and long term. Most importantly, it aims at fostering innovation process that will help to develop more sustainable cities and enhance the quality of life or our inhabitants. And it's needed to rating the cities radically through the design, planning, use, and management. And please kindly address causes, not only effects of the problems. In the face of changing, diversified, strengthening, expected, and unpredictable acute shock and chronic stress, it's necessary to act together, locally and globally, as soon as possible for well-prepared, safe, livable, and therefore sustainable cities. Otherwise, our only habitat, that is our planet, will be unable to pay the cost of our inaction. Thank you very much.
Betül Hanım, çok teşekkürler. İstanbul'daki o durumları anlatınca insan ister istemez daha da bir tedirgin oluyor. Ama tabii İstanbul'da yani asırlardır orada kendisi bir resilience'ın, dirençliliğin, nasıl diyeyim, göstergesi gibi duruyor. Sırf Mısır Çarşısı 400-500 yıllık. Çok sağ olun paylaşımlarınız için, ama belirttiğiniz gibi bir de bir gıda konusu var. Ve bunun doğal kaynaklarla, doğayla olan ilişkisi var. Ben hemen vakti harcamadan sözü Melike'ye bırakıyorum. Buyurun Melike.
Thank you, Nuri. In our programs in DKM, we are trying to find scientifically sound and applicable tools for natural resource management and nature conservation. And I'm an urban planner by education, but today I would like to talk about resilience of food systems and their sustainability and ecosystems. So let me give you brief information regarding the state of food security today. Reports on food security shows that 1 in 10 people in the world was exposed to severe levels of food insecurity in 2019, and this was mainly caused by a conflict crisis, as it's already mentioned. But in addition to that, economic crisis, climate-related shocks, crop pests, high food prices reduced the availability of food. And the number of hungry people in the world is just increasing day by day. And unfortunately, we are far from reaching to the target of zero hunger by 2030. And the situation is worsened by this COVID-19 pandemic. Projections show that the pandemic may add up to 130 million people to the total number of undernourished in the world, and we will see the situation at the end of the year maybe. It also disrupted the agricultural production because during the lockdown, the farmers couldn't reach their farms, their land, and they couldn't harvest, and food supply in big cities was interrupted for a while. And behind all that, our population is increasing exponentially, and diets are changing, and the task of feeding an additional 2 billion people by 2050 is a challenging task, especially under the risk of climate change. FAO estimates that we have to increase our food production by almost 70% by 2050. 70%, it's a serious number, and we have to be more productive with less resources. I'm saying less resources because we already degraded almost 35% of arable land in the last 6-7 decades. Soil fertility has declined considerably in many parts of the world due to intensive agricultural practices, overgrazing, and increasing use of pesticides, herbicides, over-irrigation, and a significant amount of land is just facing desertification. Another problem we face is that urban expansion and urban land uses, they're risking the fertile agricultural land. We are building settlements, factories, road infrastructure on fertile land, and using agricultural land for fuel production with monocrops, harming land and nature. And we are also consuming significant amount of water. Water demand globally is increasing because of the increasing population and changing lifestyles, but much of the demand is driven by agriculture. We are consuming 70% of global fresh water for agricultural production. And while doing this, we are also emitting 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So, I'm also drawing a negative picture here, I know, but unfortunately this is the situation. And climate change is further aggravating all these risks, and frequency and severity of extreme climate events, as Nick mentioned, increased. Storms, floods, heat waves, drought increased in the last couple of decades all around the world and affected more than 3 billion people and caused 1.2 million deaths. In terms of agricultural production, climatic variability manifests itself not only as extreme events, but also slower and gradual changes in precipitation and temperature, which is significantly important for agriculture. And it increases also the risk of pest and disease spread and soil degradation. Unfortunately, crop models show that production of wheat, rice, maize, which are the main crops in our diets, will decline globally. How will the food production adapt to this situation? Adaptation can be autonomous as a response to a disaster, for example, and which is most of the time what we do, or planned, which is more sustainable. We have to determine priority areas because we have limited resources, and more research should be done on vulnerability and increasing resilience for a sustainable future. As Lina mentioned, we have to identify our sensitivities and adaptive capacities. Today, resilience became an integral part of sustainability. For example, for a system to be sustainable, we have to consider its vulnerabilities to disturbances. Due to the risks imposed by climate change, you cannot set future targets of sustainability without integrating resilience frameworks for climatic changes and extremes. For example, ensuring efficient use of water in crop production also increases the resilience against droughts and water scarcity. Using less water protects precious water resources, protects soil, improves plant health, and makes it more resistant to droughts. I believe we should just implement solutions creating win-wins in terms of resilience and sustainability. We have to plan for joint implementations. And as nature conservationists, our response to this call is promoting ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions. We are benefiting from the services of nature free of charge, and if we lose them, it's either very expensive to compensate them, or sometimes it's impossible. And nature-based solutions have multiple benefits and easier to maintain compared to human-made structures in the long term. It's basically mimicking ecosystem functions and conserving them. Ben already mentioned some of them. For example, water bodies in the cities acts as buffers during a flood event, like a sponge, or green spaces and parks cool down the temperature during extremely hot days in summers. And within the framework of agricultural production, these methods not only increase the resilience of farmers and agricultural production, but also can contribute to the livelihood of the producers, which is quite important for sustainability, because farmers are rational individuals and they want to maximize their profit, as we all do. Thus, we have to consider economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainability at the same time. Not only for increasing resilience, but also for sustainable development purposes, for rural development purposes. And how are we going to create this system in a sustainable way? Some of you already know, we recently had 2 major dust storms in central Anatolia, which was basically caused by changing wind patterns, drought, and unsustainable farming practices. It started from the rural areas in the mountains, but affected our lives in big cities, caused respiratory diseases, accidents on the roads, etc., reduced our life quality. And one nature-based solution that we can promote is like windbreakers, which is a perfect nature-based solution. And it should be implemented in order to prevent these dust storms and increase the resilience of these areas to wind erosion. However, there are certain limitations regarding financing, land tenure, maintenance, and protection of these trees. I mean, from our experiences, it's not that easy as it seems to implement this simple planting activity. We have to formulate simple but effective governance models, especially at the local level. Importance of governance and governance models is already mentioned by other panelists, and I would like to add one more point, especially regarding nature-based solution implementations, either within cities or within rural areas. We have to formulate governance in a way that is built on collective efforts of different actors in charge of different responsibilities, such as financing, implementation, data collection, monitoring, training, reporting, etc. And they have to know their responsibilities, and they have to be ready to accomplish the goals. And different actors have different strengths, and we have to make collective efforts to maximize the benefits, like private sector, government institutions, NGOs, academia. We should cooperate. Private sector most of the time is more flexible in terms of using finances, and government institutions have legal power. NGOs, we are also quite flexible in terms of implementation. Academia knows the technical background of all these implementations. And we have to cooperate to around a common goal. It is also important to sustain the communication and interaction between the actors in the long term, because their priorities and approaches might change in time. So it is important to remind them the common goal from time to time. And another important issue regarding the nature-based implementations, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for sustainable resilience, and we don't have enough resources to try and fail using each solution. So we have to learn from each other. We have to share experiences. We have to share our data. And living in a digital age, it is much easier to do this. Currently, we are working on these kind of platforms, first of all, to see the big picture regarding the impacts of climate change, and sharing our experiences regarding adaptation and lessons learned in a participatory way and in a comprehensive way. We also want to create a platform to share our data and databases. Actually, it was in our mind for a long time, but this pandemic speeded up the procedures, and we revised our projects in a way that we can develop some digital platforms. If anybody wants to get more and in-depth information regarding our work, you can find my email on our website, dkm.org.tr, and we can talk about these things more, and maybe we can create some cooperation opportunities. Thanks.
Melike, çok teşekkürler. Bu arada tek Türkçe konuşan ben oldum. Bir böyle şaşırıyorum. Acaba ben niye sadece Türkçe konuşuyorum diye, ama ben yine Türkçe devam edeyim. Son toplamayı İngilizce yapmaya çalışacağım. Biraz daha rahat oluyor terminolojiden dolayı. Şu anda son konuşmacımıza geldik. Zamanımız çok iyi gidiyor. Herkese 15 dakika içinde konuştuğu için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Lorenzo Barcelona'dan katılıyor ve gerçekten benim çok sevdiğim şehirlerden birisi. Bize şimdiye kadar konuşulanlarla beraber mutlaka benzerlikler vardır, farklılıklar vardır. Barcelona örneğini de paylaşacak. Ben sözü direkt Lorenzo'ya bırakıyorum. Yap.
Hello, can you hear me? So yeah, thanks for giving me the chance to present. As the panel moves on and arrive to the end, it's more difficult to say something interesting. There has been so many things been introduced, and at least I could start by saying that I'm happy about that I do not disagree with anybody still. So happy that there is this synergy, and there has been this discourse which builds one over the next presentation. So from my side, what I feel I can contribute here is from representing a bit, it's an honor and something which scares me, the World Urban Resilience Research Network. So I'm here with you today trying to give some key message or some insight from this network, which has been already 10 years, more than 10 years, which is one of the leading international network of researchers, not practitioners, that our niche, let's say. Maybe you don't know the network, but I'm sure that within our more than 400 researchers and scholars, I mean, within the board, we have these famous guys which defined urban resilience, and then many multilateral agencies, Europe, and I guess everybody's using their definitions, colleagues which defined and assess the assessments and evaluation tools, the policy challenges, etc., etc. So I'm quite proud of representing them. And what I would like to share here is a bit how we moved through the definitions and framing of resilience, bridging theory and practices, and why 2 years ago we decided to, and we felt the need of organizing an international event like this one we've organized, discussing why resilience need to be reframed if tackling the urban system. Okay, that would be my main message within this intervention. And I will use also the case study of Barcelona has been introduced to do that. So let me share not a whole PowerPoint, but at least some image, because we want to look at meanings and what's the meaning of resilience for tackling then sustainability, and discuss hopefully together what's the meaning of sustainable resilience and which resilience is not sustainable then. So this is, let me see if I can share easily. Okay. Hope, can you see this?
Yes, we see it.
PowerPoint? Okay, just a couple of slides without running through it. So this complex picture with a lot of arrows, right? Different colors, is just a simplification, an extreme simplification of a big research, which try to understand from which fields resilience and resilience principles brought which kind of meanings, messages, from the original disciplinary domains toward cities, and so toward urban resilience. As you've seen, we mapped different, this is just an oversimplification of a long study, but just to let you know that there are many disciplines, and you can see that through their evolution to resilience in an engineering system, in ITC or political science or psychology and child resilience, right? And how each discipline is brought and built toward the definition of understanding what they can bring for understanding urban resilience. So what's interesting here, it's in the next slide actually, is that how these pictures influenced urban resilience is that there is a kind of bias within the bibliometric nature of different domains. So you know that in ecology, they're quite bibliometric. That means that I'm an urban planner, I don't feel I needing to write so much and publish so much. I'm interested in practices in plants, etc. While in other disciplines like ecology, they need to publish in order to go successfully through their career. So that means there is a crazy amount of papers and then publication coming from that field when you compare to the others. That means that when you look for resilience or resilient thinking, the first results you will surely see in Google or Google Scholar, whatever, will probably come from their disciplines. And that's what happened. Here you have a reference about a recent paper analyzing this bibliometric approach to urban resilience, which were the main fields influencing the definition, etc. And most of them, and I'm sure you all know, the definition from resilience coming from ecology, Forks, Resilience Alliance, and that kind of scholars, which are great, but they induce some kind of misunderstanding of not just what's the meaning of resilience, but what the purpose of resilience and the linkage to sustainability to us, planner or urban scientist or urban manager. And here's why, as you can see. So in social ecological resilience, so from their perspective, right, look into ecosystem or social ecological system. As somebody already mentioned, resilience is an asset, is a capacity, set a capacity to help the system to survive and be persistent then through changes or threats. So there is a natural link between resilience and sustainability, right? In order to be successful and sustainable, an ecosystem needs to thrive and to adapt, whatever. So if you're resilient, you're also sustainable. If you take this key, not message, but key, like framing in your mind when you try to translate resilience into cities, cities are the most unsustainable systems and unjust and built on speculation, etc., etc. So there has been actually, it's nothing new, since a decade we're publishing on that. This key message with many practitioners took and many politicians, and within many reports up to the highest level reports, resilience and sustainability has been mainly not just aligned, but just synergistically put together and used almost interchangeably. And so what's the threat beyond that is that we are confusing sometimes what is sustainability in the social ecological term, in the planetary term, with what is persistent of an urban system, right? So sometimes we look at the risks in our cities and we try just to lower that risk and keeping thus our system as they are without, sorry to be too metaphorical in 10 minutes, okay? Allow me just to be simplistic and conceptual. But this is real a thread about what we refer to and how the meanings of resilience can drive policy agendas with respect to resilience sustainability. New urban agendas and many papers are usually, and many reports and many frameworks are using resilience and sustainability, not just coupled, but interchangeably. And because there is tons of publications starting to claim that this is not the case if we want to drive urban transformation, then I would just like to explore briefly with you the latest insight from recent publication and the conference we organized about reframing urban resilience. Our basic assumption was that we need to understand the main difference between generic and specific resilience that we all know, right? So you know that there are a lot of specific resiliences depending on the topic and depending on the domain. from the green city to climate resilience to disaster resilience to smart city monitoring to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have this generic dimension of resilience when we speak conceptually, right? Systemic thinking and thinking that how to increase the resilience of the world system to look into uncertainties, right? Like the COVID resilience that we're facing, we're not that resilient. Basically, evidences are demonstrating all these kind of messages happening in the last decade, whether you probably know in Medellin or New Orleans, these could be defined like unexpected or more like unexpected side effect of resilient policies or plan, like whether in the light of the climate resilience and avoiding flooding and landslide, then in Medellin, you have this kind of trade-off, trying to building this green belt at the expense of slums and poor people with low resilience, of course, respect to those issues. So there are tensions when you try to implement resilience, respect to which resilience are you looking at, the resilience of a poor community, respect to the resilience of the city center. And there are all this kind of trade-off. I won't enter in detail, but just to mention that when we try to implement resilience, that's something that here in this panel, I guess, is really at the very focus and the very center, right? This is a publication, a very recent publication in Nature by colleagues Alquist and et al. In Natural Sustainability, in which, as you know, it has been said by Lina, Ben, that and others, the resilience is a process, right? So within this process, step by step, you need to navigate different boundaries, right? You don't want to fall into undesired consequences. And so theoretically speaking, we call it the adaptation pathway, right? How you adapt different threats and step by step you build your strategy to enhance resilience. So in this publication, some colleagues try to refer, as you can see, different pathways with respect to whether change is driven to a high sustainability or low sustainability, and how resilience can be enhanced to some system, to some part of the city, from some domain at the expense of sustainability. And we'll look now to some example in Barcelona, whether you build drought resilience through desal plants, right? And you mitigate or reduce the risk of flood while increasing the cost of the energy production, the impact of the environment, and they're fighting actually among departments, because the green department is just seeing that the emissions because of the diesel plant are rising. But of course, there is the trade-off, right, between sustainability and greening, and then the specific risks that you try to avoid. And as for this example, we can say that it's very useful to understand how we design the path toward increasing resilience in terms of decreasing the risks, and which is the trade-off with sustainability, for example, because we are talking about sustainability now in this panel. But what we've been exploring recently through the conference we organized, it's just not the tensions and trade-off between resilience and sustainability, but actually the tensions between resilience, sustainability, community resilience, and justice. And so I don't want to bother you with a PowerPoint, just let me know if I have one or two more slides which are interesting before jumping to the pictures. So as you can see, what's really one of our main insights from the framing perspective, right, the meaning perspective, and then how to operationalize and implement resilience, have been represented through this graph without entering the detail. This is just to say that there are three main approaches to build resilience and to conceptualize, of course. One in which you want to keep low, right, the amount of change and come back in the shorter term possible. So this bottom line is the timeline, right? So keep it short. Any disaster, any technical disruption, you want to keep it short, of course, to get back to the business as usual, because you need electricity or getting rid of water during a flooding, etc. So there are all critical assets and capacity which aim at bringing back what we need at the current situation, the services we need, right? And then we have another approach, which is building adaptation measure, which want to keep low the amount of change and keep these for the longest time possible, as all the I don't know, the Rotterdam moving diet, right? Just you want to protect it, an arbor or a city, a system, and keep this protection as far as you can, so you're safe and protected there without changing anything. And you just keep and assume that the risk that you're getting there, and you try to protect your system. And then there is all this set of solutions following the third approach, which is the transformation, right? You want actually to embrace change, to change things and make them as long lasting as possible, right? So there is all kind of paper and project exploring each of these approaches. Now, what I would like to bring to the table here is that, notwithstanding is clear that there are different approaches. Sometimes I see colleagues or policymakers just fighting for one approach and say we need to build resilience in this way or that way. So allowing transformation rather than bouncing back. Or actually, it's quite interesting to share with you. The co-chair of the network, Sarah Miro, has recently published a paper a couple of years ago asking more than 100 practitioners across US about their definitions, meaning of urban resilience, and which principles they were using to implement it. And the results was that because of the US mindset, right, the cultural mindset, is that they're rooted into property and risk reduction perspective. And so most of them just answered that the resilience was driving implementations rooted within the robustness building and safety, right? Maintaining that and protecting properties and assets. And then when you look to the principles they were using, there was consistency, right? All the implementation of the processes represented and respected that. While we ran that in Europe a couple of years ago, in 2019, and it will be published the report soon, we found out that there was a high level of policy inconsistency within our answers. Because, I mean, everybody was giving us the complex, broad definition of resilience consistent within the transformative, adaptive capacity to cope with both stress and shocks, etc., etc. But then when looking to the projects that we're implementing, there was not policy consistency. So they were talking about transformation, and the projects were just hard infrastructure and protection about assets, or things like that. And how we justify that with in-depth interviews was that the more broad you try to get, the more collaborative, the more holistic approach you try to implement, well, the hardest become to be politically consistent and to align the fight between different agenda. And one of them, to me, my understanding of the resilience implementation challenges is that looking into these three different approaches, what you get is that it's different to make all these approaches to work at once. And you need to do that. You need a system with the characteristic to respond quickly to any disruption, while do not close the door for adaptation in the middle term, and while do not close the door to experiment and innovate, paving the way toward a transition. That's super complex because of the conflictive agenda and budget and skills and inertia you have in the system. And just to close that and be practical, I have here some picture about Barcelona showing that, I mean, I'm still amazed. It's 10 years I'm living here, and I'm still amazed about how many things in this city happens within a decade. And I would just to share you how many projects and things run under the resilience agenda. So the most famous one is the one that is related to flooding and infrastructure. Barcelona won in 2013 the UN SDR at that time award for critical infrastructure resilience because of all this work about flooding resilience, right? And so you have a long tradition of planned drainage plans that allow this award and justified it. But then we experience also drought, the worst drought And while spending much of the money, European money, in flooding infrastructure, then the flood hits very heavy, because it was the worst in 100 years. And we were not prepared. And so we react to that. We didn't plan and strategically align those specific resilience to drought strategy within sustainability, equity. We just reacted to that specific shock, and that way they just bought fresh water from France and southern Spain and built a diesel plant, like a reaction. And in the meanwhile, what happened is a huge blackout. So again, they reacted to that. And reaction after the reaction, they say that notwithstanding we were building specific resilience to all these shocks that were hitting, they decided to getting organized as, and here I'm closing here, since, I mean, Betul, Malika, and Ben, and Manny, and Lina, all of you mentioned this coordination issue, right? So in Barcelona, they tried to set up this coordination team beyond the One Resilient City initiative, which of course, when entered the city after this board was already established, helped him push it forward. They had this board in which, as you can see, urban planning, social services, energy infrastructure, different services as infrastructure try to sit together and align the agenda. Now, the issue that I'm launching here to close is something which is happening now in the light of COVID. And I want to let you with these pictures. Maybe you know the Barcelona Green Plan, in which we are closing and getting pedestrian streets in 2 streets every 3. So we're doing these superillas, macromanzanas, green blocks. And we want to get 120 green blocks. And so there is this huge plan about getting pedestrian and biking around and be sustainable. And this is really amazing because of the quality. Okay, some indicator of performance, which I won't explain that. To whom is interested, I can show the whole project. And so as you can see, amazing results. What COVID-19 is helping here now is to push further this plan, which, as you can see, is born more than 20 years ago. And so under the resilience umbrella, now we're pushing for the plan, which was already there about sustainable living, sustainable Barcelona, quality of life, things that are very far from what with One Resilient City and before that, the UNSCR award, because of the urban resilience unit in Barcelona was doing. And so we are in a situation in which we have kind of 3 powers and 3 agendas about climate resilience, about One Resilient City strategy, and the planning team, which is working since 30 years into this super block sustainable development and management strategy, right? So seeing that there are these 3 power and conflict of interest and of budget and power, of course, and who's leading, who's coordinating. So, and this is my final remark, and I guess back to what has been said about coordination, alliances. So Barcelona has already a lot of alliances. What I see is that now, in terms of policy agenda, it's quite challenging to define how you implement a policy agenda which has lots of departments conflicting for leading it. And when they try to align the different objectives under the Sustainable Barcelona, Green Barcelona, and Resilience Barcelona, and they are quite neat to do that, you see that you're looking just a very pixel of the picture. So we're talking only about Barcelona city center. When you look to the metro area, it's just a mess. And you have bike lanes with end anywhere, and 20 municipalities with no budget, with any plan or climate change or mobility plan, and we're trying to build now a strategy for the Metro Barcelona Resilient Plan, and we don't have basic data about that. Notwithstanding, we have a city center which is iClay, C40, One Resilient City. I mean, it's part of all the networks, and they're doing great in the city center. But then there are all kind of trade-off within the metro area. And what's happening now with the COVID is that resilience is happening on the ground. Resilience is happening when many colleagues of mine just go 1 hour away in the nature, working from remote in small town near to the coast, beautiful coast in Catalonia. Would invite you here to see it. And in places where you just go a couple of months a year, and now they're suddenly emerging as destination for perfect urban living, which were inaccessible pre-COVID. So what I see emerging through the as resilience emerging because of the COVID as a reaction is that now different cities very far from here feels finally part of the world region. And where there's no budget, now there is demand for services in the city center, which is full of services. Now there is lack of funding for the services because the people are escaping for the city center because of the COVID. And so this reorganizational process is, of course, embedding issue of social justice, regional economy, and then mobility and all our understanding of what sustainable living is. So I would like to close here. I'm sorry if
Yes.
I see I'm taking
Thank you,
too
Lorenzo.
much time. Sorry about that.
No worries, but right now we have 15 minutes, and I would like to continue with several questions, and I think I encourage all the participants to share their questions with us. But when I'm listening everybody, I mean, we all clear with lots of issues. I mean, we are like the gang, okay? And the part here is that we all agree that the only constant is the change itself. And while definitions change, while styles change, and while the system that we call it is a complex system, is already changing, how can an organigram, how can an individual take a motivation for resilience? And we already highlighted from several speakers that we have the target E, we have the frame, we have plans, we have already some networks. But how you motivate an individual as a citizen to ask for a better feature, and then how you can manage the trade-offs between a woman and man demand, between a poor and rich demand, and how can you make this transformational change for resilience in a justice way, in a sustainable way? Because the world we are living now is vulnerable, is unsustainable, and injustice. So how we can make the sustainability and resilience work hand in hand? And it's an open question because all of you have great experience and knowledge, and I really give the floor to anyone who would like to jump in. Yes, Lina.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a good question, but at least the way that we approach it, and like one of the first questions is like resilience of whom? Like we don't build resilience in isolation. We don't build resilience for the sake of it. We build resilience to make our citizens and our inhabitants more safe and to improve their well-being. So that's why, you know, at the beginning I said the importance of including non-traditional actors into the discussions. And what is important is that you include them not only at the beginning when you consult, you know, on a plan that's usually at this point is like basic, but actually include them throughout the project cycle, you know, until actually implementing or maintaining, and they need to co-own it and be part of it. This is the only way to actually build trust among a local authority and the different communities. Of course, we can understand that there are a lot of cultural issues, biases, unconscious, you know, stereotypes, racism that need to be addressed and solved in order to ensure that actually what a city is doing impacts positively and it creates value for all, and especially the most vulnerable. Because the problem here is that usually cities invest or act in areas that actually benefit the already privileged, whether this is like a very nice green park or so on. So the challenge here is how actually a city is able to share, you know, how collectively the city shares its value. And it's not easy, apparently, and we haven't found the golden recipe about that. But I think there are cases of cities and leaders, because in the end of the day, it is a matter of who is the leader, that at least recognize and have awareness of what they're doing and how this impacts differently the different communities of the city.
Yeah, just building on what Lena said, I think that you have to engage people in different ways because we all have different interests and passions. And one of the things which has struck me recently is that sometimes the best way into a conversation about climate change is to start with music, hip hop, or art or culture. Sometimes the best way to talk about urban resilience is to start with nature. I just think it's not always obvious, like the best way to kind of lead off and to actually engage people. But if you start with what they're really passionate about and the people that they follow and who are influenced by, then often you have a better chance. And there's been some really great case studies of that recently in my life. I've just been doing a collaboration with a hip hop artist to engage a group of youth people, young people in Croydon who are from an underprivileged background, who became quite inspired about a community project, which I didn't expect to see, but interesting. And so yeah, that I'll stop talking. But I think we need to think for the less conventional approaches sometimes.
Great. And one word is very striking: trust. And building a trust is another issue. But Ben said it's art, culture, and unconventional tools. And when we are talking today and make a plan for, let's say, 20 years, we are talking about an unborn 18 years old water and how we can make this intergenerational justice on the other hand. And currently the tools we have able to project the future or understanding the risk or preparing a collaborative plan somehow not available or not sufficient. And where do you see the technology in that sense? What would be the part of technology and digitalization? Yes, Melike.
I would like to start
Melike, then Lorenzo.
Yeah, I would like to start with an example I just saw yesterday. There was a competition for young people and regarding digital technologies, and one of the winners is an application where you can register to your city and you can vote for the decisions taken in the municipality. Normally they're having these meetings, but we never go there. We never just talk about them. We never make decisions regarding that. But they created a tool, a digital tool, where I can reach to the decisions and think about it and vote for it. And it was amazing to see this because we really have to create tools, which is like digital tools are the most effective ones for increasing the governance, because it's not always easy to reach to the information data, understand it, or develop an idea regarding that. In terms of like climate change, it's like terms and these words that's really difficult to understand sometimes, even for technical people like us, because it's derives from most of the time like in Europe or in America, and we cannot internalize it. We cannot just put it somewhere in our mind, and so we have to be messengers and translate these terms to people, like I do it with farmers, and I translate ecosystem services term, the climate change term into their language, and try to increase their awareness regarding this so that they can understand, so that they can demand for something, as you said. Because they have to be aware that they need it. Sometimes you don't realize that you need something, but when somebody just gives you a tool, you realize that you need it. And afterwards, your awareness increases and you start thinking about it. So basically, it's our duty to create these kind of tools. And digital technologies make it much faster and much easier to control. It might be dangerous sometimes, but I think we can find to solve out those kind of problems.
Thank you. And Lorenzo?
Yeah, just building on that, I mean, I fully agree in line with what just said, and Ben actually was saying. So to my experience, also the role of communication. So beyond the project that you can do, like tackling the communication issue and the education issue. So Like, it's not surprising to me that after 3 years project here in Barcelona about many 50 propositions for urban transformation, the national press just highlighted one, which was related to a tax increase, for example, and neglecting all the other, exploring the potential of what's been said, within the education, that there are no programs in our national language about resilient sustainability, and people have no idea about what blockchain is. But then you look at the context and how communication and education is handled, and then you realize, of course, they don't know what blockchain is in a country where renewable energy is driven by huge investment from the national government into centralized infrastructure and bringing solar power from the south through Spain with a huge amount of energy losses, where the very nature of these would be to build a distributed network into decentralized network, right? But you have Endesa, which is just wishing to have big contracts and big infrastructure, and there's no chance. And we have even had a solar tax. If you want to get renewable, you have to pay, and that is not convenient, etc., etc. So in this term, I'm bridging what Betul was mentioning about building for Istanbul a center working for resilience. So having centers, having people that build and create and shape a different communication visions and stop any kind of formative education. This is also a way of enabling this, of course, technological shift. I see many technology available, but then culturally, the people are not empowered nor enabled to even explore them. So just to mention that, how important is it?
Right. And it also, yes, Betul, please. You muted, Betul. Yep. I mean, it should be in any Zoom meeting. Thank you for doing this. Yes.
It's okay now?
Yeah.
So in order to embed resilience concept, maybe we can make an investment for younger people. Social media can be used. For example, I have a son who is 10 years old, and he is really interested in YouTuber or something else, and they follow them by using Instagram or something else. We can use the social media. Maybe for 17 goals of sustainable development, kit books will be published, animation series will be occurred or something else. And social media is really important in this area in order to embed it resilient concept, I think. Thank you, Nuri.
Great. And in the last 5 minutes, I will have 2 questions. One is again for everyone, but the last one will go to Nick. The first question for everyone. So when we talk about the trust and really planning and with all this complexity and thinking about how to use the technology, where do you see the power of local knowledge? And how can local knowledge and culture and actually the physical and cultural feature of the system can guide to resilience?
I'll start if you want. I think it's contingent on all of us to respect the local knowledge and to ensure that if there's an opportunity to hear that through these processes and make them as participatory as possible, because you know, people who've been living in this place for a long time, they kind of probably inherently understand the risks and know how to bring the community together because they've seen it done before. So, I mean, it's not, yeah, I would just maybe just stop there. I think when you're going into a city, when you're not from that city, you have to work very, very hard to kind of meet people where they're at, especially if you don't speak the right language, and I never do.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, Lina.
Yes, I just want to follow up on what Ben said, and that's at least from our side. This is, you know, the way we work. In the end of the day, the city itself and the locals do the work, and it's not us coming in. Even in the cases where there is, like, you know, additional expertise that supports the city, still it's, you know, it's just additional. But it is important that there is a joint understanding, and this is a work among the people of the city. Otherwise, this cannot be just something that comes from outside. It will come, it will be, like the project or the program. And we have cases in our cities as well that, resilience was a program funded, the funding ended, therefore, nothing has left. And it was just, it's good to have, or it gives an international kind of help to the mayor. Therefore, it is important to actually build on what you have on the ground, and the local knowledge and the cultural norms is the basic foundation. And also in most cases, these you can find their actual great resilience initiatives and great resilience tips in a way, because this is local knowledge that has been built and is based on the reality of what is happening on the ground. And we've seen, again, many cases in cities where the city actually unveiled traditional practices that then they brought them back, whether this was to address climate change issues or waste management issues, etc.
Melike, any news from the farmers, their language and resilience language?
Yeah. I mean, I just saw that we have limited time. I didn't want to take time, but actually, nature-based solutions are most of the time local knowledge and traditional food production systems, because they have been evolved in thousands of years. It's more resilient to the conditions of climate change, and to I don't know. They are much more resilient to changes in general. So basically, we have to benefit from them. And also we have to consider the dynamics of a culture before introducing something, because it doesn't work all the time everywhere. Different cultures take it differently. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So we have to really consider these socioeconomic conditions and the dynamics of that society before introducing something, and monitor it afterwards so that you can see if it works or not.
Great. I don't know if Nick hears me, but my question is about what is the incentives and tools and guidance from UNDRR to cities, municipalities, and local governance? Maybe Nick would like to share some info about that. Yes.
Yes, hi, thanks. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. In terms of the tools, actually, I think Ben mentioned this a bit. The local municipal disaster scorecard, that's one of the key tools that are out there. So this is, working with local authorities, going through an assessment process of risks, different capacities in place in various urban environments, and determining capacity and understanding to reduce disaster risk. So that's a key element that we're in support of. There's also, this is also part of the Making Cities Resilient campaign, and actually there's a new iteration phase of that about to be announced later this month, the MCR 2030 campaign. So this will be building on the previous campaign of the previous period, but there'll be more information coming out regarding this. But of course, this will make use of a lot of the previous tools and processes that have been in place.
Great.
Yeah, urban level.
Thank you. And we have just 1 minute left. Last verse, if anyone would really like to say something. Okay, great. I learned a lot from you all, guys. And really, what I highlight is just, we are talking about lives, we are talking about future, and we are talking about the people who needs to get the power, and we need to take people to nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Değerli panelistlerimiz, katılımcılarımız, katkılarınız için hepinize teşekkür ederiz. Bu salondaki bir sonraki oturumumuz 17.20'de başlayacak. Hepinize çok teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler. Bay bay.
Yeah.